Why are you at odds with the idea of the ANC being able to execute its elective conferences and its elective duties in 2021 under lockdown? Why do you think it's so impossible for the ANC to be able to execute that?
Good afternoon, Oliver, and good afternoon to the viewers. Now, you must remember that the ANC was due for its National General Council this year in June, July, and due to lockdown, they could not hold the National General Council. And then you also had the Youth League National Congress, which was supposed to sit in March this year, and due to lockdown, they could not hold the National Congress. But out of that Congress of the Youth League was not going to sit because the National Task Team of the ANC Youth League had not prepared things according to what we understand, things like having a roadmap to Congress, stipulating the process, how it will unfold. For an example, we know that when you go to a Congress, months before the conference sits, there are discussion documents that are made public so that delegates or branch members of the Youth League can engage as they prepare to go to the National Congress, so that a branch delegate can have a position to engage in Congress, Now, we are at a point where you have some of ANC branches which have got members that are around 2,000, 3,000, and according to the lockdown regulations, so you can't have a gathering of more than 100 or more than 50 because they seem to change now and then, the regulations, especially now in December. But if you've got a branch of 2,000 or 3,000 people, for that branch to correct, if it's 2,000 people, that means you need 1,000 plus one for the branch to correct. So automatically that will not be possible. And most of those branches are in the rural areas. Now you must remember that there's issues of network problems in the rural areas. So, and also issues of people not being able to afford data. So you can't even have a BGM, which will be virtual, to elect your delegates, to a process, whether for local elections, for councillors, if you are to comply with the regulations, for the NGC, which the ANC has later now said that the NGC will sit next year in May. One still has to see if that will be possible, because of, as I've indicated, that in the ANC you've got branches that are more than 1,000 up to 5,000 members in one branch. And the thing about the ANC is that the ANC needs to change how it does its things. And the first and foremost is the ill discipline in the party. In the past few weeks or months, we've seen numerous marches by ANC members, some marching to Lituli House, some we saw recently when the Secretary General appeared in court. Members were there marching. So you are dealing with a lot of issues. There's a lot of power struggle also going to the 2022 Congress. But the ANC, because of there is a lack of ill discipline in the organization, it will be very difficult also for them to have this process, because you must remember that also during this time of BGMs, it's a game of numbers. So if you're a branch chair and you're not agreeing with the branch secretary, for an example, so what you do, you will keep your members and not to take them to the venue where the Congress must sit. So next year, then you have got two things: the NGC, and then the process of local government, where delegates, where councillor candidates will be elected.
Now, why can't every branch secretary just pick up the phone and call every member in that particular branch and just ask them, hey, comrade, who are you voting for that's on the ballot list? And that way you would have been able to get the number of votes in. Each branch would have voted for a candidate, and it trickles all the way up from branch to region to province and ultimately to national. Why can't the ANC do that?
In the ANC, there's issues also of trust amongst members. And I'll give an example. I mean, even going to Nazareth, for an example, you had provinces that were taken to court on the eve of Congress, arguing on the issue of the processes that unfolded going to the National Congress by the different provinces. So you might be a secretary, but you're not even trusted by members of the organization that process can be fair, can be credible, and can be transparent, So there's the issue here in the ANC, that there's a lot of mistrust amongst comrades.
So, but is that trust ever going to be overcome? Because, I mean, if you argue, as you currently are arguing, that even at Congress, where they physically congregate, there is distrust. That distrust is by no means dispelled just because a phone call has been made. Surely the courts, like they've done with the Northwest in the last Congress, the Free State, Mpumalanga, and even as far-flung as KZN, where these litigations happen on the eve of Congress, surely the courts will once again allow that to happen. Do you think that members, a million of them, should push for this to go ahead nonetheless?
I don't think that because at a point also where we are, there's a process where the ANC itself, for an example, maybe at a conference can then engage that, okay, this is how we're going to deal with matters going forward in terms of BGMs and so forth, you know. And you have a situation where some members might say it's unconstitutional what the secretary of the branch has done, or it's unconstitutional what the ANC leadership is saying, because we are guided by the constitution, you know, in terms of how the process are done. So this is what I'm saying, that is the third part is that there's a lot of mistrust. So people will throw the constitution of the ANC to say we are not agreeing with this process. And by the way, they will be correct, you know. So unless the ANC starts to, you know, the NC talks about a process of renewal, and they've been talking about it for some time. And it's like a myth, this process of renewal, because we have not seen much of a change within the party politics and the power struggle within the party.
The DA had their elective conference earlier this year, and it was a digital one. Do you think the outcome was truly representative of what would have been the case if they met physically? That is to say, do you think Mbali Ntuli had a fair and equal opportunity to campaign for votes? And do you think that's a model that other political parties should look at?
Well, I did not follow the process of the DA to the latter, but I only followed the Congress itself when it was sitting and looking at the professionalism that the DA showed during their process, you know. So in terms of the internal politics, I don't have the capacity to engage further and say Mbali would have won or would have lost. But the professionalism is there. And I think if she thought maybe probably she was cheated, for an example, she might have decided to go to court and pursue the matter there. But at the end of the day, the world is changing, it's not stagnant. And that's why the ANC needs to stop operating like an organization that is still in exile, and an organization that still wants to operate underground. The ANC needs to reinvent itself and start changing the way it does things if it really wants to survive moving forward, because the world is changing. We can see with the new norm that we're living around now in terms of COVID, but that will have to find within the National Executive Committee of the ANC for them to show the political will, so that even branch members from all different factions should have confidence in whatever outcome, so that you don't have a process where a particular faction in the ANC will then dispute whatever decision is taken by the ANC and start to be problematic and anarchic and so forth.
Now, let's take a look, for instance, at what would happen if the ANC does not have elective conferences. But first, many people argue that COVID was a convenient excuse, and that, in fact, with a structure like the Youth League, there were already, pre-COVID, people who were trying to frustrate the process, making sure that the Youth League never sits for Congress and elects new leadership. So, one, they claim that COVID is a convenient excuse. What happens then if the party and all its structures never sits for Congress?
Well, as things stand, on the Youth League matter, I think the NC took a wrong decision in 2019 when they appointed the National Task Team, which is led by ANC NEC members. Because you must remember that this is not for the first time that the ANC Youth League is disbanded. I was part of a task team in 2013 of the ANC Youth League after the expulsion of Julius Malema and Floyd Shivambo, where the NEC of the Youth League was disbanded. So the ANC at the time decided to take the top-bottom approach in terms of rebuilding the Youth League. Now, 7 years later, the ANC still talks about rebuilding the Youth League. It shows that there is no political will. The ANC needs to change its approach and actually disband all structures of the Youth League up to a branch level and allow young people just to be activists of the ANC and focus on community programs that speak to the people of this country, and also focus on what the ANC seems to be lacking on, which is political education. So once you can do things differently in that regard, I think
But Rebone,
the ANC
what
can
happens?
come alive.
What happens if that sort of behavior trickles up? And that's to say that the ANC various branches and regions and provinces don't sit for Congress next year and might only sit for Congress 2 years from now, when everybody in the country has been inoculated and regulations now allow for 1,000 people to congregate. What happens in that instance? Does it mean that the ANC will have to take Cyril Ramaphosa unopposed back to a Congress virtually, or that Ramaphosa will have to ask for an extension of 2 years as president of the party, leading him into the next calendar election that is set for the legislature?
Unfortunately, the ANC needs to go to its Congress, especially with the current power struggle that we are seeing in the ANC between the CR17 and RT forces, within the ANC. No one will allow for that Congress to sit virtually, because this processes of virtual conferences also at the time when things are heated because of the ill discipline, someone's mic might be muted or they might be removed, from this process. That's the unfortunate part, that how things are in the ANC, that you've got a lot of, I was reading the other day that the ANC currently has got 1.4 million members, but I'm asking myself, this 1.4 million members, what are they contributing to the organization? Because most of them seem to be very problematic in the organization. So as things stand, unfortunately, yes, you also have the Women's League, by the way, that was supposed to go to its Congress this year. So the Women's League, we don't know when are they also going to Congress. So both the leagues are due for Congress. Yes, you've got Mpumalanga, which must go to its conference. You've got the Northwest ANC and Western Cape that must go to its conference. But unfortunately, the ANC-NEC needs to have a frank and honest discussion to say they need to change things, how they do things. But it must be a process that it's in an honest process where there's transparency. As I spoke earlier on about the issues of mistrust within the organization.
Okay, but also, Rebone, it's kind of unfair to say that 1.4 out of 1.4 million members, most of them are disruptive. I think most ANC members have proven themselves to be able to put together a branch meeting and vote for a candidate. But that's where we'll have to leave it for now. Thank you so much for your time. Really, really do appreciate it.